I started learning Unreal Engine 5 and had this idea of doing some sort of a vintage house environment scene. And I wanted to mainly work on my lighting skills, so I did 3 different scenarios. A day and night scene with the basic ray tracing and one golden hour sunset scene with Lumen. This is in no way a tutorial, it's just me sharing my creative process and knowledge with you. So first of all, I gathered all my ideas into a board, which I usually put on my second screen. I found this online whiteboard called Miro, which I really like to use for my projects because it's cloud-based and I can access it from all my devices, and I always like to draw and sketch on top of my images, which you can do here. So I started blocking out my scene in Blender. I'm doing a living room and a bedroom for the interior. And overall, I was grabbing different structures I liked from my board to model the interior, like the windows, like the fireplace, and the overall structure of the bedroom. And because this was not meant to be a game-ready environment, I didn't really think of the modeling that much. But when doing these things, you have to be careful of double vertices and overlapping faces, because later on I had some trouble with it in Unreal and had to come back and fix things up. Here I thought I should clean up all my mesh, so I merged my vertices by distance. I found this SketchUp texture site which has many useful images for texturing interiors, and I use them in my scene for the wallpapers and the carpets. I applied some materials to the walls and floor to see how my UVs line up. I felt like importing my scene in Unreal, and because this was my first time doing an environment like this, I honestly had no idea what was going on. So let's say at this point I was mainly testing things out and messing up, and also watching a ton of tutorials. So then I realized my scene had more to be worked on and went back in Blender to adjust things, flip normals and clean up vertices, and overall finish my structure in Blender. This first ground molding I did wasn't working out and also wasn't looking good, so I started it from scratch and redid it all. And honestly, I had a much better result following this tutorial I found on YouTube. I imported the scene in Unreal and had set up some basic lighting with an HDRI backdrop, so I can see better what I'm doing. And my main source of knowledge for the lighting scenes came from Mebratu's lighting workshop, which I really recommend because it boosted up my lighting skills a lot. Here I'm setting up some cameras and adjusting everything. I'm also adding some box reflection captures to the rooms. And I'm trying to see how everything could look with the right materials and experimenting with different textures and settings. I had this weird problem with some of my assets I took from the marketplace. They were not showing up on the screenshots, and I fixed it by changing the static mesh LOD from 0 to 1. Now I'm planning out where I want my sources of light to be and trying to figure out the best place and look for them. I realized my bedroom was way too small for a living being and scaled it up easily in Blender by parenting everything to a cube. And I also added a second window, but later on I decided to leave it only one besides the bed. I had to import the new bedroom mesh once again because I hadn't saved the FBX. So I learned the hard way that you should always make sure everything is saved. I found some models of picture frames in Sketchfab and made my own painting collections in Blender with the images I find suited best my interior. Now I'm starting to set dress everything with different assets from my library. I always find this the most interesting part of making an environment because you start to think of who lives there and what's the whole story behind these props and assets. So I like to take my time for the set dressing and I continue to do it until the end and I add small touch-ups here and there. I'm also taking a second to organize my files because things always cluster up if you don't organize them on time. There were some problems with this curtain mesh, so I just switched it up with a new better one. I had some light leaks in the bedroom, so I tried fixing it with some planes, but I think in the end I just remodeled the whole ceiling and fixed it. And I also realized that I need some tiling material inside the fireplace because it shouldn't be all plastered. I downloaded this free Megascans 3 pack from the marketplace and I use it to fake some sort of a garden outside the windows of the house. Now I'm starting to work on the night lighting and I removed everything and started adding point lights where I wanted my main source of light to be. I'm also adding sphere reflection captures where I need more specular highlights. I'm adjusting the exponential height fog and adding spot and area lights for extra light bounces and detail. Here I'm adding an imperfection mask to the windows, which I learned from this guy's video, and he has an amazing workflow in Unreal. My reflection capture spheres and boxes were way too bright and were messing up my lighting, so I had to go through every one of them and readjust their setting a little bit. I also had messed up these wallpaper material nodes and was getting weird results, but I think in the end I fixed it. I wanted to tweak my post-process volume and learned how to make custom LUTs in Photoshop so I can add them to all my scenes in Unreal to have a more color-graded cinematic look. And this was just a test with one of Blade Runner themed LUTs I found online. I then color graded all my cameras according to what I wanted and adjusted some settings to achieve my look. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going back and forth from Blender to Unreal because my meshes were not showing up alright in Unreal, and this was because of some overlapping faces and incorrect geometry. At some point after a more refined stage, I always take some time to sketch on top of my renders to figure out what isn't looking right and what could be improved in my final render. These are my final touch-ups for the night lighting level. I duplicated my level and started working on the day lighting, and this time I'm using the HDRI plugin and some directional lights to achieve the sun lighting. I'm once again touching up the reflection capture spheres and adding area lights and spotlights where I want more light to be shown. At this point, I'm trying to add some cinematic sequences and movement to the cameras, but I didn't really know much about it, so I went on working on the third lighting using now Lumen. Since the beginning I had the idea to have a ceiling fan so it can rotate and look cool while my cinematics are going. So here I'm adding a rotating movement to my mesh. I added some particles and I went back to figuring out how to do my cinematic sequences with all the camera movements, and I had to keyframe all of the actor meshes that were getting on the way of some cameras. I copied the mustard sequences to the other lighting levels so I can have the same camera movement in all of them. Here I'm doing some final adjustments to the scene and making sure everything lines up in all the levels correctly. I wanted to have a 4K render and I tried out some different movie render settings, and in the end I rendered out EXR files for every level, which I later added in Premiere Pro to make the cinematic movies. I also made high-resolution screenshots of every angle with the render passes I needed to make some magic happen in Photoshop, and I later edited them, and I always used the ambient occlusion and mist pass, and this time I decided to render a normal and a scene color pass. After checking some of the renders, I had to come back in the scene to improve some lighting issues, so I movie rendered everything again. I wanted to touch up and color grade my still images, so I took some time to do that in Photoshop. I use my passes in different layer modes and add some filters, so I achieve a more uniform and good looking image. Yeah, here I realized that one of my lamps was floating because one of the suitcases had a messed up LOD and it wasn't showing up in the render, so yet again I rendered this camera sequence. I always have a folder with all my color lookups and filters I use, and after I was done with the Photoshop edits, I exported some custom entities for heavy lighting so I can use them to color grade my videos in Premiere Pro. I'm very happy with how this project turned out. Even though I see many things that could be improved and bother me, I think for a start it is good. At first I was feeling off and nervous about changing my workflow when using Unreal, because I usually do everything in Blender. Although I had used Unreal a little before, I had never done anything on such a level. And my main advice is to not be that scared of learning new things and softwares, and if a texture isn't working, switch it up. If an asset isn't sitting right, change it with another one. And if you don't like the lighting, well, maybe you have to start all over again, but remember that the next time it will be better.